it doesn't end the way you expect. It ends in silence so complete that it forces you to question whether it ever truly began. The most painful stage with a narcissist is not always the arguments, the criticism, the manipulation, or even the moment they walk away. The most devastating moment often arrives when they become completely silent, as though you were never part of their life at all. That silence can feel heavier than every conflict that came before it. It leaves people confused because there is no clear ending, no explanation, and no final conversation to make sense of what happened. Many people do not understand the significance of this stage until they are already living through it. If you have ever experienced that unsettling silence and wondered why it hurts more than the chaos, the answer lies in what that silence truly represents. Understanding it can become the beginning of your healing journey. When a narcissist reaches this point, the relationship may finally be ending for you, but something else is ending for them as well. The illusion they maintained starts to fade, and recognizing that reality can be painful, yet freeing. When a narcissist is genuinely finished, there is rarely a dramatic scene that marks the end. There is no heartfelt explanation, no meaningful closure, and often no final argument that provides understanding. The endings most people expect are usually loud and obvious, but the real ending is often much quieter. Anger, insults, blame, blocking, public attacks, or emotional outbursts can actually indicate that some level of emotional investment still exists. Those reactions, while harmful, still show engagement. Even negative attention reflects a form of attachment. True detachment looks very different. It can feel as though someone suddenly erased your existence from their world. One day they are focused on you, and the next day it is as if you never mattered at all. This shift often occurs when they no longer receive what they were seeking from the connection. If you stop reacting, stop defending yourself, stop explaining, or stop feeding the emotional cycle, the relationship may lose its usefulness to them. Once that happens, conflict no longer serves a purpose. Drama requires energy, and when they no longer see value in the interaction, they may simply withdraw. This silence is not a sign of emotional maturity, growth, or peaceful resolution. It is often a sign of complete disengagement. Their attention moves elsewhere, and they do so without offering any explanation. What makes this experience especially difficult is the absence of closure. There is no conversation that helps you understand what changed. Calls may go unanswered, messages may be ignored, familiar patterns disappear overnight. Communication fades without warning, leaving you with questions that seem impossible to answer. This creates a powerful psychological struggle. The mind naturally searches for explanations. You replay conversations, you revisit memories. You wonder if you made a mistake, missed a sign, or could have done something differently. The lack of answers forces the mind into an endless search for meaning. You may begin questioning everything. Was the relationship real? Did they ever truly care? Did you misunderstand the entire connection? These thoughts emerge because your mind is trying to complete a story that was never given a proper ending. The silent departure often serves another purpose as well. By leaving quietly, they avoid difficult conversations, accountability, and responsibility. A dramatic exit can invite questions, criticism, or consequences. Disappearing without explanation allows them to move forward without confronting the impact of their actions. In their version of events, the relationship may simply become something that no longer mattered. Rather than acknowledging unresolved issues, they may convince themselves that the connection naturally faded away. This internal narrative protects their self-image while leaving the other person struggling to understand what happened. One of the hardest truths to accept is that emotional detachment is often more final than anger. Anger still indicates involvement. Blame still shows that someone is reacting to your presence. Even hostility means you occupy space within their emotional world. Your actions still affect them enough to provoke a response. Detachment is something entirely different. Detachment means your reactions no longer matter to them. Your feelings no longer create a response. Your absence goes unnoticed. Your presence no longer influences their emotional state. In their mind, you have been removed from the emotional system altogether. This is why indifference often feels colder than the mistreatment itself. Abuse, while damaging, still creates interaction. The nervous system has something to respond to. There is still an emotional exchange happening, even if it is unhealthy. Indifference offers nothing. There is no signal to interpret, no reaction to analyze, and no emotional feedback to process. The silence creates a unique kind of uncertainty because human beings are naturally wired to seek connection and resolution through interaction. When that interaction suddenly disappears, the emotional bond does not vanish immediately. Instead, it remains unresolved. The mind continues searching for answers. Memories surface repeatedly. Thoughts circle endlessly. Questions remain open. Closure feels just out of reach. At the same time, the other person may have already disconnected emotionally, creating a painful imbalance. One person is still searching for meaning, while the other has already walked away internally. This complete withdrawal also serves as a form of protection for them. Genuine emotional engagement would require self-reflection. It could require accountability, empathy, guilt, or acknowledgement of harm. By disconnecting completely, they avoid facing those uncomfortable realities. Rather than examining what happened, they may simply rewrite the story in their own mind. The relationship becomes something insignificant rather than something unresolved. It is easier to dismiss the connection than to confront the emotional consequences attached to it. For the person left behind, this can feel as though their history has been erased. Not because the relationship lacked meaning, but because the meaning was not held equally by both people. What felt deeply significant to you may not have been valued in the same lasting way by them. That silence delivers a painful message. It does not necessarily mean you were unworthy, unlovable, or at fault. It means that, in their mind, your role is no longer serving a purpose. And for many people, that realization hurts far more than any insult ever could. Indifference represents the final stage because it removes emotional energy entirely. Negative attention still carries emotional weight. Anger carries energy. Conflict carries energy. Even resentment requires emotional investment. Indifference requires none. At that point, you are no longer someone they want to argue with, control, impress, convince, or provoke. You simply no longer occupy their psychological focus. And that is what makes it feel so deeply dehumanizing. Human beings naturally associate emotional response with connection. Even disagreement confirms that we exist in another person's awareness. When that response disappears completely, it can feel as though our significance disappeared with it. But the truth is that your value was never determined by their attention. Their silence does not erase your experiences, your worth, or the reality of what you lived through. It only reveals the nature of the connection more clearly than their words ever could. Indifference takes away even the smallest sense of acknowledgement. At this point, they no longer feel the need to justify their actions, defend their choices, or influence how you think about them. Your opinion of them loses significance because they no longer seek emotional validation from you. If communication still occurs, it often feels cold, distant, and purely functional. In many cases, it disappears altogether. There is no affection, no conflict, and no emotional tension remaining. What is left is simply emptiness. For many survivors, this stage hurts more than the toxic cycles that came before it. Even unhealthy relationships contain a certain emotional framework. There are reactions, exchanges, and patterns, however painful they may be. Indifference strips all of that away. It leaves a void where connection once seemed to exist, forcing you to face a painful truth. The bond you experienced may not have been shared in the same way by the other person. The emotions you invested were genuine and meaningful to you, but they were not maintained with the same depth or consistency on the other side. This emotional numbness also serves a purpose for them. Remaining emotionally connected would require reflection. Reflection could lead to guilt, regret, or an awareness of the harm they caused. Emotional detachment protects them from those uncomfortable experiences. By shutting down emotionally, they avoid confronting the consequences of their behavior. Instead of processing what happened, they move forward as though nothing significant occurred, carrying little or none of the emotional weight left behind. When people reach out for answers during this stage, they often end up hurting themselves even more. The mind desperately searches for understanding from someone who has already checked out emotionally. Yet the absence of a response is often the response itself. The silence is not hiding a secret message waiting to be uncovered. It is evidence that the emotional connection has already ended. Indifference is not a temporary pause that can be negotiated away. It is not a challenge to overcome or a situation to fix. More often, it represents the final destination of their emotional withdrawal. Accepting that reality can be incredibly painful, but it is also the moment where genuine clarity begins to return. Their withdrawal is rarely the result of personal growth, self-awareness, or emotional maturity. More often, it occurs because the emotional exchange they once relied upon is no longer available in the way they want it. Their focus tends to depend heavily on stimulation, validation, attention, or emotional reactions. When those elements fade, their attention frequently shifts elsewhere. From the outside, this change can appear sudden and shocking. Internally, however, it is often simply a redirection of focus toward a new source of emotional stimulation. Novelty becomes appealing because it offers something different. A new person may provide fresh admiration, fewer boundaries, stronger reactions, or less resistance. That new dynamic can feel more rewarding to them than maintaining an existing connection. Once their attention settles on this new source, the previous relationship often loses its importance within their internal world. Emotional investment is withdrawn quickly, without the reflection, grief, or reconsideration that most people expect after a meaningful relationship ends. This is one reason the ending feels so abrupt and confusing. It is not necessarily because you failed or because you lacked value. It is because you are no longer serving the emotional function you once served within their psychological framework. The silence, emotional distance, and apparent indifference all communicate the same message. The relationship was emotionally concluded long before the visible signs appeared. By the time you begin noticing the change, they may have already detached internally. This also explains the unsettling calmness that often follows. There may be no signs of sadness, longing, regret, or emotional struggle from their side. The emotional energy that once fueled the connection has already been redirected elsewhere. While you are still processing memories, questioning what happened, and trying to understand the loss, they may already be focused on someone new. They may be mirroring a different person, creating a revised version of events, and presenting themselves as though nothing has changed. Watching this happen can feel deeply painful. It is not only the loss of the relationship itself, but also the realization of how quickly they appear to move forward. What makes the experience even more confusing is that this transition is rarely acknowledged openly. There is usually no honest conversation where they admit they have emotionally moved on. Instead, the signs appear indirectly through growing distance, reduced communication, delayed responses, or a sudden lack of interest. If questioned about it, they may minimize what is happening or deny it altogether. Full honesty would require self-examination, and self-examination threatens the image they work hard to maintain. Admitting they have shifted their emotional focus would force them to confront patterns they may not want to recognize. This is why attempting to compete for their attention or prove your worth during this stage becomes so damaging. You are no longer participating in a balanced emotional relationship. Instead, you are trying to find your place within a system built around emotional supply and validation. Their departure is not evidence that you are replaceable or lacking in value. It reflects the way they manage emotional needs and redirect attention when the stimulation they seek begins to fade. When the role you occupied no longer serves that purpose, attachment can disappear with startling speed, leaving you to process an ending they completed internally long ago. One of the most difficult realities to accept is that true closure is rarely offered when a narcissist has completely detached. Genuine closure requires acknowledging emotional impact. It requires recognizing that a meaningful connection existed and that actions carried consequences. That level of acknowledgement often demands accountability, and accountability can threaten the narrative they depend on to preserve their sense of self. Admitting the reality of the damage caused would require confronting uncomfortable truths. For that reason, closure is frequently withheld, not because the relationship meant nothing to you, but because acknowledging its significance would require a level of responsibility they are unwilling or unable to accept. This unfinished state is particularly distressing because the human mind is not designed to sit comfortably with unresolved emotional experiences. The nervous system naturally seeks closure. It tries to complete patterns, fill in gaps, and restore coherence. In the absence of answers, it begins to replay moments, reconstruct conversations, and imagine alternate explanations that might finally bring relief. Yet, in this type of dynamic, closure is not something that can be received from the other side. Any explanation offered would likely be filtered through self-interest or avoidance, offering partial truths or distorted framing that may deepen confusion rather than resolve it. The absence of closure is not simply silence. It is a structural break in shared reality. Without a mutual ending, the narrative splits. One version exists privately on their side, where the relationship may be minimized, simplified, or mentally rewritten as something that naturally faded. On your side, however, the experience remains emotionally unresolved, carrying weight, memory, and unanswered meaning. There is no shared point where both interpretations meet. This is what makes the experience feel destabilizing. There is no reference point to confirm what was real and what was not. No final conversation to anchor understanding. Only your internal experience and their external absence. The important shift begins when you accept that closure is not something they will provide. The silence is not a puzzle that will eventually resolve if you think about it enough. It is the ending itself, already completed in their behavior, even if it was never spoken aloud. The clarity you are searching for cannot come from a source that has already withdrawn from emotional responsibility. When that realization begins to take shape, attention slowly turns inward. Meaning is no longer extracted from their silence, but built from your own understanding of what you experienced. The focus shifts from decoding them to grounding yourself in what you know to be true from your own side of the connection. The confusion that follows this kind of ending is often mistaken for weakness or unresolved attachment, but it is actually a predictable response to emotional disruption. When a relationship ends without structure or explanation, the mind is left trying to reconcile two incompatible realities: the intensity that once existed and the absence that followed. This reaction is not random. It develops because the connection itself was inconsistent. Moments of closeness, attention, or emotional intensity were often followed by distance, withdrawal, or unpredictability. Over time, the nervous system adapts to this instability by staying alert, constantly scanning for emotional cues, trying to predict shifts before they happen. When disengagement finally occurs, that internal system does not immediately shut down. It continues searching for patterns that are no longer present. The silence becomes louder than any argument because there is nothing left to interpret, yet the mind still attempts to interpret it. This is why confusion often deepens after contact ends completely. Without external signals, the mind turns inward, replaying memories and searching for explanations in an attempt to restore coherence. In that process, self-doubt often emerges. Questions arise about what was missed, what was misunderstood, or what could have been done differently. But this questioning is not true clarity. It is the mind reacting to the sudden absence of emotional structure. It is a form of disorientation created by a bond that ended without explanation. From the other side, there is often no comparable confusion. Their experience is shaped by detachment rather than reflection. The ending is not processed, it is bypassed. This creates a painful imbalance where one person is still emotionally engaged with meaning-making, while the other has already moved beyond the interaction entirely. This is also why the experience can feel so psychologically heavy. There is no shared conclusion, no mutual acknowledgement, and no final emotional exchange. One side is left trying to interpret a story that ended without its final chapter, while the other no longer participates in the narrative at all. Over time, recognizing this pattern helps reframe the confusion. It is no longer seen as evidence of personal failure or emotional inadequacy, but as a natural consequence of inconsistent emotional dynamics followed by abrupt withdrawal. The question slowly begins to shift from "what is wrong with me?" to "what kind of experience did I actually go through?" That shift marks the beginning of internal reorientation. The silence that follows disengagement is often mistaken for peace or emotional resolution, but in reality, it serves a different function entirely. It is not neutral, it is not mutual, it is not shared closure. It is a form of withdrawal that allows disengagement without confrontation, reflection, or accountability. In this silence, the emotional burden is quietly transferred away from the person who withdrew and left entirely with the person who remains. You are left holding the unanswered questions, the emotional residue, and the need to make sense of something that was never fully explained. And in that imbalance, the real work of healing does not begin with their explanation, but with your own return to clarity, where meaning is no longer dependent on silence being resolved by someone who has already chosen not to speak. And in the end, the silence was never the answer you were meant to wait for. It was the moment you were meant to stop waiting altogether and begin returning to yourself.